Papermaker Mondi's third quarter underlying profit was higher than a year earlier and said it plans more cost-cutting measures on the back of a slowdown in demand. Joining us in studio now for more detail is David Hathorn. He's CEO of Mondi. Thanks so much, David, for joining us this afternoon. Well, as I say there, we've got the underlying operating profit for the third quarter coming in above that of the comparable prior year period. But looking at things on a quarter-on-quarter basis, it's come in below. So run us through or give us a sense of the trading environment that you're facing right now, because on the one hand it indicates a better context than last year, but some waning momentum within the course of this year.
Yeah, look, certainly the first half of this year was very strong. We had fantastic demand growth across the board, and we've seen a moderate softening into the second half. Nothing dramatic at all. In fact, the biggest proponent of the demand reduction is internal stock reduction that's taking place. So we are destocking our own business, and that certainly is reducing our volumes. But that is a short-term issue. The benefit of that will show later into next year when the stock levels are low.
And you've got to restock.
Absolutely, you have to restock. So I think that's where we are. But clearly Europe is softening, there's no doubt about that. And we're seeing modest demand reduction on the back of that, sort of 1 or 2% demand decline taking place. So nothing dramatic, certainly nothing like what people might have expected a week or 2 or 3 months ago, but a slightly softer world.
That on the demand side of things. When it comes to the supply side, we've had Mondi seeing that planned third quarter maintenance see to some shutdowns coming to bear. How did that come to bear on the supply-demand equilibrium?
Well, we do big maintenance shuts every year. Yeah. This year, the preponderance of those fell in the third quarter. So that was a particular item we highlighted that would affect the third quarter profits. But it's an annual event, and this year we carry most of it in the third quarter. So that takes out quite a lot of production side. We've also done some destocking and taken some commercial downtime to balance the books there as well. So clearly we have made less volume in the third quarter than we would normally do. The third quarter is normally a softer period anyway with European summertime. People are on holiday, less happens in Europe.
And that dynamic translating into what exactly for pricing power for the group?
Well, I think overall prices are fairly stable, slightly softer again, in line with slightly softer demand. I think if you take it by grade, if we look at uncoated fine paper, there's a closure coming through in the fourth quarter, we hope, which is the Alizé mill, not ours, but a competitor's. That's 4% of European supply. That has to be helpful for pricing. That's uncoated fine paper. Go to corrugated. Prices on the kraftliner side are off by 1% or 2%, nothing dramatic. Recycled containerboard is coming down a bit, but then the input costs are coming off by a few percent as well. So that's sort of a price reduction to match costs, as it were. On the sack kraft price side, prices have held absolutely stable, so nothing to show.
Let's hone in on one of your divisions here. I mean, we've got the uncoated paper division doing well, which means or implies that you've got things like office demand doing relatively well, as opposed to things on the coated paper business where, that market's come under pressure. And, that is an environment that would have an impact on your South African division, specifically the newsprint business. It continues to deliver poor results there. What kind of dynamic are you seeing there?
Well, I think the graphic paper industry, people who make paper for advertising print purposes, it's a challenging space, there's no question about that. Fortunately, as you say, the predominance of Mondi's exposure in the printing and writing area is to uncoated fine paper, which is office usage. And that's holding up pretty well, and we expect that to continue. But certainly printed advertising spend is in decline, and that's affecting magazine papers, newsprints and the like. And we have a very small exposure to newsprint. On top of that, of course, we have energy costs in South Africa, which are also adversely affecting the newsprint sector.
Let's get into those energy costs, because like you say, it's quite a big cost that you've got to bear. And government has to date no policy on cogeneration, but there's a huge opportunity there to use raw materials from paper producing process for energy generation moving forward. The kind of stride we're seeing being made in that regard?
Well, we really do. I mean, Mondi does make a huge amount of energy, so most of the waste that we generate is then consumed back into energy production. We have additional energy opportunities, particularly in South Africa, that we are hoping to take advantage of. Those are latent boilers that we can retrofit and put turbines onto and burn more biomass or mixed fuels to make the energy. Certainly, regulatory clarity would be very helpful to progress those projects. We are making gradual progress down the road, but regulatory clarity would be useful. I think ultimately these will happen. They are very nice return investments for us. We have similar opportunities in Eastern Europe and Russia that we are currently taking advantage of bit by bit. So one hopes that we will find progress there fairly soon. And that cost imperative, of course, is screaming loud as well. Take us through the restructuring that the business is seeing right now and how that fits into the cost imperative as well. I think the restructuring, the fact is we've done most of our restructuring. We did a huge amount of restructuring back in 2008 and 2009. We are now fairly even keel, although there's an ongoing smaller elements of restructuring to take place. I think the real issue is, where the big cost moves here in South Africa, energy. Energy in South Africa is now more expensive than it is in Germany and Austria and any of our European sites. So that's a real issue, and that's going to get worse in South Africa. And that's where cogeneration becomes so important, and the ability to counteract that.
On that cost side, what about input costs? Because for this period, providing some cushion was the stable reducing input costs that you saw filter through. What's your outlook on those costs moving forward?
I think if the world continues in a softer macroeconomic sense, one will see cost softening as well. So certainly that will help mitigate some of the market developments that take place. But overall, right now, one has to say that we clearly are in a softer world, and margins have compressed a bit. But nothing dramatic either from a volume, a price or a cost perspective. And
also when it comes to the status of the business, you've said that you're over the hump of your restructuring. Also, capital projects. I mean, going forward, what does this imply for your cash flow position?
Look, we are looking very good from the cash point of view. Our debt has come down dramatically. We listed 4 years ago. We had 1.6 billion of debt. We've spent over $1 billion on expansions and acquisitions since then. So but debt is now down to less than $1 billion, or around about $1 billion. So that's pretty attractive. Cash generation in Mondi is strong going forward. We've got, as you say, the big capital projects are behind us, the restructuring is behind us, all of those things absorb cash. So we should have very good cash generation looking forward. We've made it very clear that our intention is firstly, now that we've got the investment grade standing, to support a continued growth in our dividend. Then, try and bolt on some acquisitions, and there are a number of those we look at, the sort of medium-sized bolt-on opportunities. Clearly, to the extent that those don't come to fruition and that we end up with surplus cash, we will return that cash to the shareholders as well.
David, let's take a look at things on an environmental perspective just to wrap up this conversation. I mean, we've had paper makers being considered the bad guys from an environmental perspective, where trees have an important role to play in carbon sequestration, carbon capture. What strides are being made by the company to improve your environmental footprint?
Look, we have made very substantial strides. Firstly, all of our forests globally are managed on the FSC standard, which is the sort of gold standard globally in terms of environmental practice in forestry. So that is good news. Secondly, we have made a lot of progress in terms of all of the industrial emissions. We now operate all of our plants to global best available technology, and that ensures that our emission levels are coming down. We've had more than double-digit reductions in all of our major emissions over the last 10 years. We've almost achieved all of the targets that we set 10 years ago to be achieved by 2014. There's one left outstanding, and we should make that in the next year or so, I hope. So we're now in the process of setting additional targets for the future. So a lot of progress has been made, and that's true for many players in this industry, I think.
Well, certainly progress that we'll be keeping an eye on. Thanks so much, David, for your time this afternoon. David Hathorn is CEO of Mondi.